the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from cardswire.com, one of the USA Today NFL Wire sites, and today we are still working on our opponent preview, so the 14 teams that the Cardinals will face in 2023. I am reaching out to writers and mostly the site editors from our sister sites for the 14 teams the Cardinals will play. Up today, in this edition of the show, are the Houston Texans, whom the Cardinals will face on the road in Week 11. And joining me for the second time in 3 years, as the Cardinals played the Texans in 2021, is Mark Lane, managing editor of Texans Wire. Mark, thank you for joining me. And, well, how's it been covering the Texans?
Fun again, finally.
So let's take it back to the 2022 season, a year in which the Texans looked like they were in control of the top pick. I guess if you wanted to say they were in control of that, they go 3-13-1. They held the number one pick in the draft up until the final week of the season when they beat the Indianapolis Colts 32-31 and making it so the Bears moved up to number one and the Colts number two. And so, yeah, the Colts, not the Colts, but the Texans, they go with, a lot of us consider it kind of a final FU by Lovie Smith, but you were telling me before the show just now that it was kind of more a case where, the Colts stuck it to the Texans once more, as they've done historically.
Let me ask you this. Who's the one team in Cardinals history that you look at and said that's always there to just ruin the fun for them? Who's that one team you'd say?
It is the Rams because they injure all of our quarterbacks.
Okay. Well, for the Houston Texans, since 2002, the Indianapolis Colts, through one way or another, are there to spoil the fun, to just kind of be like the inevitable. And so where the Texans needed the greatest moment, which was the number one overall pick, the Colts were there to ruin it by losing. And so that's what I mean is just, and Lovie Smith did what he did, but I'm saying you just knew going into that game that if you needed the Colts to lose, to, in the grand scheme of things, help the Texans, it wasn't going to be there.
Well, and it goes on the start of the season where you had the season opening tie as well, which also... both games actually threw a monkey wrench into what the Texans ultimately. Was it an actual tank job, or did it just end up being that way?
You're talking about the season?
Correct.
I think it ended up being that way, just because there was some promise when you had Chicago and Denver, who were terrible, and they could have had some positivity to start out, but, it all just kind of tanked in the middle of the year for them. You saw them come out with the gusto of a hound dog in Kansas City. So it wasn't a complete tank job.
They suffer. They get their first win in week 5, then lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row before winning 2 out of their final 3 games, finishing 3-13-1. Were there any bright spots from what you saw last season, whether they be individual or as a team?
Rookie running back Dameon Pierce. He had 939 yards, the third most amongst rookies last year. And safety Jalen Petrie, the second rounder from Baylor. He just really ascended to that role of being an enforcer on the back end.
What were Davis Mills started most of the games last season. There was a little bit of hope that he could be something going into last year. Did he just become what most thought he would be, or did he take a step back? Did you see a difference in his play in 2022 over the end of 2021?
Well, I don't know that he really had the supporting cast, if that makes sense.
Right.
There was regression, so to speak, but you also get the sense that if he were in an offense that was able to effectively run the ball and had better pass targets than what the Texans had. I mean, no, they had Brandon Cooks, but he was a little more unavailable in his final season than he ever had been in the first 2 years he was there. Same goes for Nico Collins. So he didn't really have a lot of targets to throw to. So he was kind of twisting in the wind, so to speak. I think he could be an effective backup, or what he's proving now with C.J. Stroud, which is a competent younger veteran to challenge for that starting job, so they don't just hand it to Stroud outright.
That makes sense. Let's move on to the offseason. Coming in next to the Rise Up Here at Podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the way. Let's move on to the offseason where the Texans were quite busy. Lots of stuff. Cuts coming in next on Rise Up Here Red. We're back on the Rise Up Here Red Podcast, the first hour of Cardinals, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's start with the coaching change. DeMeco Ryans. What is the excitement level adding him to the mix as the leader of this team, especially after, obviously it's kind of a return home for him. And the success that he had in San Francisco as defensive coordinator, despite very little experience, and just the glowing reviews that seem to come from anyone who knows anything about him. What is the energy about the building in the city now with DeMeco as the lead guy?
It'd be like if Elvis went on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh,
I mean, there's constant excitement. There's positivity. There's reality that it's still a rebuild job, but there's optimism that Ryans eventually will lead them through it. And that's what everyone around Houston is expecting. I think there will be challenges for him as a rookie coach. And they've kind of been evident in the offseason workouts because there were players who got soft tissue injuries throughout, when you start getting OTAs and stuff. And generally, that's a sign of just guys maybe being overworked a little bit, which is usually a sign of a rookie coach finding his way. Nick Sirianni talked about this in his OTA availability this year, about how that's one of the things you learn as a coach is not to overwork guys in off-season workouts. You don't want to have any of those soft tissue injuries. So, there's a little bit of reality that's there if you look for it with Ryans. But overall, it's Beatlemania's back in Space City.
And that's an interesting point, because especially in the voluntary part of the off season, especially in the climate of the NFL today, you want to make sure that the environment is inviting to these players who don't technically have to be there. Now, we move to free agency. Was there any player lost that would be considered an impact loss that they lost in free agency?
I'm going to say just Ogbonia Okoronkwo, because he was just a nice edge defender to have. He really did a good job of harassing the quarterback. Maybe you could say Rasheem Green, but really, because of the paucity of talent on the roster, there's really nobody in free agency that got away, so to speak. With the roster in general, I would say Brandon Cooks would qualify. But in terms of the overall exchange of veterans lost versus veterans gained, it's kind of a wash with a slight edge going for the Texans.
Yeah, the free agency list I see here is extensive. Definitely needed help across the board. They had a former Cowboys tight end, Dalton Schultz. They bring in Robert Woods, receiver, formerly of the Rams and the Titans. You go on the defensive side of the ball. You bring in Jimmy Ward, who knows the defense from his time with the 49ers, a pretty impactful safety / slot guy. Sheldon Rankins on the defensive interior, Shaq Griffin at cornerback, Denzel Perryman, Devin Singletary at running back. You bring in Case Keenum, who is still pulling an NFL contract somehow. Corey Littleton, who had a promising season a few seasons back at linebacker. Chase Winovich. Which of those additions are you most excited to see on the Texans?
Devin Singletary, as he complements Dameon Pierce. Robert Woods, not so much. Shaq Griffin. I'm sorry. Shaq Mason, although he's a trade and not a classical free agent, just as it relates to forming a better offensive line. Hassan Ridgeway, because he was there in San Francisco with DeMeco Ryans, so he knows the system. Same goes for Jimmy Ward. What can he still do as a veteran, let alone communicate to these younger defensive backs on how to thrive in Ryan's system? Then there's some interesting veterans like Denzel Perryman. What does he have left in the tank? And can Shaq Griffin compete with Steven Nelson to be that boundary corner opposite of second-year Derek Stingley? So there's really just anticipation, not in the level of a blue-chip free agent that you would have, but kind of like a Christmas tree where you've got, say, 20 gifts under the tree, but no real big gift that you know you're going to get, like a PlayStation 2 or anything, but still 20 little gifts of what could be gift cards or something, versus kind of like the 3 massive gifts people get under the Christmas tree, and they know it's going to be this and it's going to be exciting. So it's just really anticipation spread broadly.
And I get a kick out of the PS2 mention because it shows our age. So I appreciate that. And honestly, the big gifts, like the big time gifts they got, were selected in the draft, which we want to talk about next. It comes down to this. It was a disappointment not to get the first overall pick. However, do you think that the Texans would have gone with Bryce Young over C.J. Stroud first overall? Or do you think that Stroud was always the guy that they were going to take?
I think they were going for Young, and when Carolina made their move, then the Texans, pivoted and started looking towards Stroud. I think that Carolina's interest in Young is what made them look at Stroud as a viable target, because they realistically only had one shot to fix the quarterback situation, because next year they'd have twin first-round picks again, but how long can you keep losing like this?
Right. So they swing for the fences overall. So they take Stroud second overall. So far, what is the feeling about Stroud moving forward? They're depending on where you read, who you talked to. Stroud, well, as good as Bryce Young was, there are some that believe that Stroud might be a better pro. He's a much polished passer. He doesn't necessarily do off schedule what you see in a lot of quarterbacks now, but I know the arm talent is there. It's hard to believe that he would be a bad selection if you can't get Young. Stroud might be like a nice ground rule double quarterback pick as opposed to swinging for the fence. I don't know. He's probably even more than a ground rule double to me.
The thing with Stroud is he really showed what he's capable of in that national semifinal game with the Georgia Bulldogs, because he really played off schedule on multiple snaps against the best defense in college football. So he's shown that he's capable of that. What makes him, the better pro, so to speak, than Bryce Young is just his measurables, because he's bigger and young. And you've seen it with Kyler Murray. Those diminutive Eddie LeBaron-sized quarterbacks, sometimes they don't hold up real well. So I think it's just kind of related to that. I think both the Panthers and the Texans got really great prospects, and I don't feel like Houston missed out because Bryce Young got away. What Stroud has been able to do is he's been able to come in and learn the system, remain humble, just seek deference from Davis Mills, with whom he's competing against, Case Keenum, and, he's even earned the respect of a guy like Laramie Tunsil, who's already referring to him as my quarterback and our quarterback. So it just really amounts to how Stroud is able to handle the punches, or I should say the welcomings, from all across the NFL throughout this 17-game slate. I think he's got the mental makeup and character to be Houston's quarterback and to also, you may not see it vocally in the ways that people would like on an NFL Films microphone, but you'll see it in how the offense plays, what type of respect they have for him.
They go with the big move, trading with the Arizona Cardinals, moving up from number 12 to number 3 to take Will Anderson. I think Will Anderson is a home run of a pick. If there were between of all the stuff that was happening with the Cardinals in the offseason, keep the pick, trade the pick, it felt like it was logical to stay there and draft Will Anderson because of just how special he promises to be as a pass rusher, as a person. I get why the Cardinals traded back and then traded up because they're thinking now and future. But Will Anderson, you can't ask for really anything more from him because while he is not as big as Tyree Wilson, his measurables are good, his athleticism is good, his production in the best conference of college football is unmatched, and on top of that, you get one of the hardest workers and best people. He's going to be a star, isn't he?
Yeah, undoubtedly. And you get your face of the franchise, if you will, in Stroud, which also automatically gives you a leader on offense. Now you get the face of your defense in Anderson, and you've got your two leaders right there, the pillars of your team for the rest of the 2020s. And he's going to be playing in a scheme where the defensive line attacks, they get upfield, they don't really read and react as they did in Lovie Smith's scheme. So he's going to have his chances. He's going to have the opportunity to be DeMeco Ryans' Nick Bosa for this defense. And that'll afford him a lot of awareness and publicity. And, watch out. I'm not going to do it, but some people might compare him to J.J. Watt, which would really be
that's unfair.
in a shadow.
That's unfair, but I get it. What's cool about what the Texans did is we go back to the 2019 draft with the Cardinals, and the question was Kyler Murray or Nick Bosa, Kyler Murray and Big Nope or Nick Bosa. The Texans essentially got their Kyler Murray and Nick Bosa in the same draft. DeMeco Ryans knows the impact that a premier pass rusher can have on the rest of the defense because, honestly, Bosa's pass rushing production was almost all their pass rushing production in San Francisco, and it changed their defense. Now, the rest of the picks that you got going on, Penn State center Juice Scruggs, kind of a surprise at that point in the draft. Tank Dell, I know there was a lot of buzz about Tank Dell coming out of Houston. Dylan Horton, TCU, round 4. Alabama linebacker Henry To'oto. Second center, Notre Dame center Jarrett Patterson in round 6. Iowa State receiver Xavier Hutchinson, and then Pittsburgh safety Brandon Hill. Of the remaining draft picks, are there any that will have a significant role now, and who are the ones that might have a bit role?
I think they're going to try to give Tank Dell a significant role. Dylan Horton, he's going to have a bit role, on that defensive line. Xavier Hutchinson, you may need to watch, not this season, but while he's on his rookie contract, as he just didn't have a real good workout, but was very productive in his final year at Iowa State. Henry To'oTo'o. He's someone that, along with Christian Harris, who's already, with the Texans, they were teammates at Alabama, and, they'll be able to feed off of each other. And then Jarrett Patterson and Juice Scruggs, they help Houston solve their center situation, and also just provide some versatility along the interior offensive line. But I think out of the rest of the guys, everybody's going to be looking at Tank Dell and what he does.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Zero podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move to the 2023 season. What to expect from Houston this coming year, and how do they match up with the Cardinals in 2023? That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. They're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. We move to the season. You've got a new head coach, a rookie franchise quarterback, a whole bunch of additions, a young pass rusher. While the Texans are, for a little bit this offseason, they were tied with the Cardinals for the lowest projected win total in the NFL. The Cardinals dropped 1 to 4.5. Expectations, obviously, for the Texans are not high. What are the expectations of at least within Houston? What is a reasonable, achievable thing that is the belief that the Texans can do in 2023?
That they can be a 6-win team. I know it's saying something, but you just kind of got to look at the complexion of their record. In other words, if they're 6-11, looks bad, but what if they were in 9 one-score games?
Yeah.
What if they were going toe-to-toe with the eventual AFC champion? And, they got the Bengals on the schedule. They got the Steelers. And they got the Ravens. What if they're going toe-to-toe with one of these teams? And then later, that team has a deep playoff run. So as long as they just don't look like, because here's what happened with the Texans last year. They would start getting outplayed by the third quarter. It's just when teams started pulling away. Now you're going to have your lulls throughout the game, but as long as the Texans are in it in the fourth quarter, and it's not garbage time, and they, that's how they get the one-score loss, so to speak, which is what happened with them against the Giants, just to name one. As long as these statistics are compiled throughout the ebb and flow of a competitive game, I think fans will be able to stomach moral victories from D'Amico Ryans. So, like I said, I think 6 wins, I think that is a nice little average.
Do they
with the nature of the 17 games and then that equal attention cake, 7th seed that's been going on now, you could see maybe an 8-9 Texans team as the 7th seed.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. Well, is their ceiling is much higher than that? And if they get a few games bouncing their way, they could sneak into. I do think it's a little tougher. I do think it's a little tougher in the AFC. But yeah, I could see that as a potential ceiling for them. And I think we know like with the Cardinals, what their floor is. Not necessarily because someone important gets hurt or whatever, but they're just not competitive enough this season, and they finish with one of the 2 or 3 worst records in the league, which benefits the Cardinals if the Texans are bad because they have their pick next year in the first round. But I know that they're betting on being better, and that with whatever pick that they would have next year, having Stroud and Anderson is better than having the 2024 top pick, right?
Right, and you still have Cleveland's pick.
Correct.
So, I think if they're as good as Cleveland is, fans won't mind.
That's right. And the Cardinals and the Texans, very comparable. Are Texans fans looking at the Cardinals game? I know pretty much everyone looks at the Cardinals game on their schedule and says that's a likely win. Cardinals fans look at the Texans on their schedule as a winnable game, not a sure win, but a winnable game. Obviously, you guys probably consider the Cardinals a winnable opponent. What is the level of expectation when it comes to that game? Is that an expected win, or one of those games that you think is one of the wins you can notch onto the schedule?
It's a game that you should win. I think that given that it's week 11, anyone who's watched football for, more than 10 years should at least be able to pick up on the fact, okay, this is in the middle of the year, and these two teams won't even be the same.
Correct.
That they fielded in week 1. So it's really one of those cases of what an old sage once said on the radio. Anytime anyone would ask him for, game predictions and stuff in August, which is tell me who's playing then, and I'll tell you what'll happen.
Yep. But the internet begs for predictions in April and May.
You can still look at it and say, yeah, I think that Houston, they could mess around and win that game. And, same for the Cardinals.
Right. That's a 2 evenly matched teams. Kind of. I think, Houston probably, I would say, has the roster a little more talented, is probably a more talented roster than the Cardinals right now. But I'm going under the assumption that Kyler Murray will be playing by then. They definitely have the edge at quarterback, which might make the difference. I don't know. But, Mark, aside from Texans Wire, the site that we all know, is there anywhere else that we can find your work, or you dinking around on social media perhaps?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at @TheRealMarkLane. Kind of taking it easy till football gets into full gear, so maybe I might say something comedic over there. You never know.
All right, Mark, I really appreciate the time out of your schedule. It was a pleasure talking to you again. I love these shows. This will end this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. We will have, unless we've hit the end, if this is the last show that I am putting together, I don't think it will be. I think this will be this weekend. But you can expect more opponent previews over the next several days. That's Mark Lane. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.